Chapter 1. The Assignment. In the Aurelian Empire, hierarchy was written in biology and blood. At the top, Sentinels, alphas whose senses were dialed to superhuman extremes. Weapons of war who could hear a heartbeat across a battlefield, see heat signatures through walls, and track a scent for miles. Unstabilized, they were walking catastrophes, doomed to sensory psychosis. At their side, guides, primarily omegas, whose empathic fields could soothe a sentinel's raging senses, tethering them to reality. A guide's strength was measured in the breadth and potency of their calming influence. Shinyu existed in the gray margins of this order. A guide, an omega. Officially, he was C-class, the lowest designation. His empathic field was not a wave, but a whisper, a subtle, gentle pressure like the first hint of dew before dawn. In training, it had taken minutes to calm a frantic D-class sentinel, while A-class guides did it in seconds. He was quiet, forgettable, assigned to the archives, a place of dust and silence where unstable sentinels never ventured. Until the day the system broke. Liang Jin, codename Rampage, an S-class Sentinel Alpha, a living legend of destruction and instability. His files were stamped with red warnings, extreme sensory acuity, prone to fugue states, has rendered 4 A-class guides comatose from feedback, approach with extreme containment protocols. He had returned from a northern front in a locked, pitch-black transport, sedated into oblivion. But the sedation was wearing off. The medical wing's energy shields were flickering under the silent storm of his waking senses. They needed a stopgap, a buffer, until the elite guides could be assembled. Archives guide Shinyu. The comms officer's voice was tense. Report to Medical Base 7. Provide low-level field support. Do not attempt direct engagement. Acknowledge. It was a death sentence disguised as an order. Shinyu's hands went cold. He had seen the aftermath of a failed bonding. Guides with bloody tears, minds shattered by the unregulated psychic tempest of a sentinel. But to disobey was treason. He walked into Base 7. The air was thick, vibrating with a pressure that made his teeth ache. It felt like standing inside a thunderhead. In the center of the room, encased in a transparent suppression pod, was Liang Jin. Even restrained, he was terrifying. Tall, all lean, corded muscle and scarred skin. His eyes were open, pupils blown wide, seeing everything and nothing. The fluorescence of the lights screaming at him. The hum of the machinery, a deafening roar. The scent of antiseptic, a chemical fire. A medic spoke through the intercom, voice tinny. Guide, engage minimal field at 10 paces. Do not get closer. Shinyu took a shaky breath. He closed his eyes, not to block the sight, but to find his own center. He didn't push his energy out. He simply let it be, a quiet pool of stillness in the raging room. He imagined the dew on grass, the silence between heartbeats. He took a step forward, then another. The warnings buzzed in his ear. He ignored them. He reached the pod. Liang Jin's head snapped toward him. Those wild, agonized eyes focused. Shinyu felt the onslaught, a psychic scream of light, sound, scent, texture. It was a maelstrom that wanted to shred his sanity. Shinyu didn't fight it. He didn't push back with force. He did what no other guide had tried. He accepted it. He let the storm wash over his quiet field, not resisting, but dampening, absorbing the sharpest edges, turning screaming feedback into a dull roar. It was working. The frantic tension in Liang Jin's frame lessened by a fraction. On an impulse he couldn't explain, Shinyu reached out. He placed his bare fingertips against the cool surface of the pod, directly over where Liang Jin's own hand was pressed against the inside. The effect was instantaneous. Liang Jin's breath hitched. His wild eyes cleared, locked on his Shinyu's. For the first time in months, perhaps years, he was seeing a single, clear thing, not a shattered mosaic of sensation. Then, the impossible happened. The suppression pod hissed open. Safety protocols had disengaged, reading the Sentinel's sudden calm. Before the medics could scream, Liang Jin moved. He didn't attack. He didn't roar. He slid from the pod and dropped to one knee on the cold floor, his head bowed. One of his large, battle-scarred hands came up, not to seize, but to hover beneath Shun Yu's still outstretched fingers, as if awaiting permission to touch. The medical bay fell into a silence more profound than any alarm. The most dangerous sentinel in the Empire was on his knees, and he was silent. Chapter 2. The Quiet Bond. The aftermath was bureaucratic chaos. Shun Yu was sequestered for debriefing. Had he used an unknown technique? Was it a fluke? Liang Jin was recontained, but without sedation. He was calm, alert, watching the door. The verdict from the high guides was baffled dismissal. A transient anomaly, declared Guide General 1, an A-class Omega whose field felt like a smothering blanket. The Sentinel was in a post-sedation lull. The C-class's negligible field coincided with it. Assign the C-class back to archives. Prepare the S-class for standard A-class bonding trials. Shun Yu, relieved and strangely hollow, returned to his dust and silence. But the silence now had an echo, the memory of a storm going quiet under his touch. He lasted 3 days. On the 4th, a shadow fell across his archive desk. Liang Jin stood there, having bypassed layers of security with a sentinel's effortless stealth. He wore simple black fatigues, no insignia. His presence was a controlled hum, but his eyes were fixed on Shun Yu with an intensity that was both terrifying and mesmerizing. "You," Liang Jin said. His voice was rough from disuse, but low, deliberate. "Your field, it has gone here." He could feel its absence. Of course he could. I was reassigned, Sentinel, Shun Yu said, keeping his own voice calm, though his heart hammered. "Liang Jin. A correction. My name is Liang Jin." He took a step closer, not threatening, but seeking. "The noise. It returns. It is less when I remember your quiet." He was describing memory as a palliative. It was unheard of. "I cannot help you," Shun Yu whispered. "I am not strong enough." Liang Jin's gaze was unwavering. "You are not loud. The others are loud. Their peace is a shout. It hurts." He slowly, carefully extended his wrist across the desk, an offering and a plea. "You are the space between shouts." The gesture was one of profound vulnerability for a sentinel, offering the pulse point, where sensation was most acute. Hesitantly, Shun Yu reached out. He didn't grab, merely laid 2 fingertips over the rapid beat in Liang Jin's wrist. The effect was less dramatic than in the med bay, but more profound. Liang Jin's entire body relaxed in a long exhalation. His sharp features softened. He didn't kneel this time, but he closed his eyes as if listening to a beloved, distant melody. A bond, true and deep, did not form with ceremony or command. It formed in that quiet archive, over a throbbing pulse under quiet fingertips. It was a tether of silence, gossamer thin and stronger than steel. They were discovered an hour later. The scandal was immediate. An unregulated, spontaneous bond between an S-class asset and a C-class nobody. It was an abomination to the ordered hierarchy. Shun Yu was placed under protective observation. Liang Jin was confined to quarters. The bond, however faint, thrummed between them across the distance, a constant, quiet awareness. Shun Yu could feel the edges of Liang Jin's frustration, a staticky annoyance. Liang Jin, he realized, could feel his anxiety, a faint sour note in their shared quiet. They were summoned before the military council. Guide General 1 was livid. "This connection is a security risk. The Sentinel is compromised by a weak link. The guide is a vulnerability. It must be severed. Sentinel Liang will undergo a guided severance and rebond with a suitable A-class guide." Liang Jin, who had been standing at a semblance of attention, went perfectly still, not with obedience, but with the stillness of a predator before a strike. The air in the room grew heavy, pressurized. The lights seemed to buzz. "No," he said, the single word flat and final. The council stared, shocked at the defiance. "Sentinel, you are not in a position to refuse," General spluttered. Liang Jin turned his head slowly toward Shun Yu, who stood small and pale beside him. The storm in his eyes abated when they met Shun Yu's. He looked back at the council. My senses are stable. For the first time, you wish to return me to the noise. I refuse. Your stability is an illusion. It rests on a foundation of sand. Wind snapped. Then let the sand hold, Liang Jin rumbled. He took a half-step back, placing himself subtly between Shun Yu and the council's glares. It was a protector's move, an alpha's move, a bonded sentinel's move. The council saw it. The message was clear: you'll go through me. They were dismissed, the matter unresolved. But the line had been drawn. Shun Yu was no longer an overlooked C-class. He was the fragile, inexplicable anchor of the Empire's most powerful weapon. And weapons, once they had a will of their own, were very dangerous. Chapter 3. The Storm Within Walls. They were assigned to the same sector, trial observation. Shun Yu was given a small room adjacent to Liang Jin's austere quarters. The proximity was a scientific curiosity to the overseers and a profound intimacy for them. The bond deepened in silence. Shun Yu learned to interpret the nuances of the quiet connection. A faint, staticky buzz meant Liang Jin was scanning the perimeter, his senses stretching out. A low, warm hum meant focus, contentment. A sharp, cold prickle meant danger, threat. Liang Jin, in turn, learned Shun Yu's rhythms. He would wordlessly slide a cup of tea toward him when Shun Yu's focus drifted into headache. He would shift his own bulk to block a flickering light panel that Shun Yu hadn't even noticed was straining his eyes. He was constantly, effortlessly curating the world to be less abrasive for both of them. One night, a training accident in a distant hangar sent a subsonic pulse through the complex. To anyone else, it was a faint vibration. To Liang Jin, it was a physical blow to the eardrums. Shun Yu woke from a deep sleep to a silent scream through the bond, a shockwave of pure, auditory agony. He stumbled from his bed into the main room. Liang Jin was braced against the wall, head in his hands, teeth bared in a silent snarl. The air crackled with uncontrolled sensory feedback. Shun Yu didn't think. He crossed the room and simply wrapped his arms around Liang Jin's heaving shoulders, pressing his forehead against the sentinel's back. He didn't project a field. He simply was, a solid, quiet presence in the storm. He imagined the eye of a hurricane, a circle of stillness. Slowly, the tremor subsided. The furious tension leaked away. Liang Jin's hands came down, one coming up to cover Shun Yu's where they clasped over his chest. His grip was desperate, but careful. The sound, he rasped. It's gone. Shun Yu whispered against his back. It's past. It echoes. I'm here. The echo has nowhere to go. They stood like that until dawn, a sentinel anchored by his guide, a guide holding the line against the chaos. No words were needed. The bond thrummed with a new, profound certainty. This is necessary. This is right. Rumors, of course, spread like wildfire. The rampage is tame. The weak guide isn't weak. He's a ghost bond, a theoretical class. An echo guide who doesn't suppress senses but harmonizes with them. The attention turned predatory. Research divisions wanted to study Shun Yu. Military strategists saw a new tool, a guide who could stabilize an S-class without dampening his combat effectiveness. Guide General once saw a threat to the entire ordered hierarchy of power. Shun Yu was summoned alone to Wen's office. The older Omega's field was aggressively soothing, like perfumed smoke. It made Shun Yu feel nauseous. Your symbiosis with Sentinel Liang is fascinating, Wen said, smiling without warmth. But it is an anomaly. The Empire requires standardization, reliability. Sentinel Liang will be undergoing a new treatment, a neural calibration that will allow him to bond properly with a guide of appropriate stature. You will be transferred to a remote monitoring station. Your service is appreciated. It was a polite execution of the bond, of Shun Yu's purpose, of the only peace Liang Jin had ever known. Shun Yu felt a cold dread seep through him, followed by a spark of defiance he didn't know he possessed. He will not accept it, Shun Yu said, his voice quiet but clear. Wen's smile vanished. He is a soldier. He will obey. And you C-class have no say. The order was cut that afternoon. Reassignment and recalibration. Immediate. When the two military police betas came to escort Xinyu from his quarters, Liang Jin was not there. He was being held in a briefing, a deliberate distraction. Xinyu packed a single bag, the cold dread now a block of ice in his stomach. As he was led down the corridor, he reached out through the bond. He didn't send words. He didn't know how. He sent a feeling, a memory, the quiet of the archive, the dew on grass, and over it, the sharp, bitter taste of goodbye. Across the complex, in a locked briefing room, Liang Jin went rigid. The general droning on about duty stopped mid-sentence. Liang Jin, head lifted, his eyes fixed on nothing, saw everything. He felt the echo of Shan Yu's quiet being ripped away, replaced by the sterile, cold intention of the institution. The bond didn't scream. It went silent. A silent, profound, and absolute no. The steel table in front of him bent under his grip with a shriek of protesting metal. Every light in the room blew out in a shower of sparks. Sentinel, stand down. Liang Jin rose. In the darkness, his senses were the only light he needed. He could smell Shan Yu's fading scent, trace the path he was being led down, hear the too-fast rhythm of his guide's heart. You are making a mistake. Liang Jin's voice was deathly calm, more terrifying than any roar. I am leaving. Do not try to stop me. He was choosing, not duty, not the Empire. He was choosing the quiet. He was choosing Xinyu. The rebellion had begged. Chapter 4. The Wilderness Covenant. The compound descended into chaos. Liang Jin moved not like a soldier, but like a force of nature, a silent, precise storm. He didn't fight to kill, he fought to pass. A pressure point here, a disarming twist there, using the overstimulation of his senses as a weapon. He knew exactly where the flickering emergency lights would be brightest, which alarms would scream at the most painful frequency. He turned the Empire's own sensory control systems against his pursuers. He found Xinyu at the west gate, flanked by two stunned-looking betas. One look from Liang Jin, and they backed away, hands raised. The bond, now a live wire of shared adrenaline and desperation, sang between them. They will never stop, Xinyu breathed, clutching his bag. Then we go where they cannot follow, Liang Jin said. He slung a stolen field pack over his shoulder and took Xinyu's hand. The touch was electric, a circuit completing, stabilizing them both. Into the dead zone. The dead zone was a vast, radioactively scarred wasteland on the Empire's border. Its chaotic energy fields scrambled technology and shattered the heightened senses of any sentinel who entered. It was a death sentence, or the perfect hiding place. They fled on a commandeered speeder, leaving the ordered world behind. As they crossed the demarcation line, the static scream of the dead zone hit Liang Jin like a physical wall. He gasped, his vision fracturing into 1,000 painful shards of distorted data. The world became a nauseating smear of false heat signatures and screaming geomagnetic noise. Xinyu felt his agony through the bond, a white-hot spike. Instinctively, he did not try to push the chaos out. He pulled Liang Jin's focus in. He wrapped his own quiet field not around Liang Jin, but through him, like a delicate latticework, giving the chaos a structure to flow around instead of smashing into. He became a filter, not a wall, a sieve. Liang Jin's breathing evened. The world was still a terrifying, sensorial hellscape, but with Xinyu as his anchor, it was navigable. He could see a path. He could hear Xinyu's steady heartbeat over the den. They found shelter in the skeletal remains of a pre-fall city. That first night, huddled in a dusty, irradiated basement, the reality of their choice settled. They were traitors, exiles. They had nothing but what they carried. Xinyu sat against a wall, shivering slightly from adrenaline crash and cold. Liang Jin, after securing the perimeter with a sentinel's paranoia, came to sit beside him. He didn't speak. He simply took Xinyu's cold hands in his own, his broad, warm palms enveloping them. He began to rub, feeling back into them with a gentleness that belied his strength. You chose exile, Xinyu whispered. For this. For me. Liang Jin's hand stilled. He looked at their joined hands, then at Xinyu's face in the gloom. I chose peace, he corrected, his voice gravelly. You are my peace. There is no choice where one exists without the other. It was the closest to a declaration of love that a man like Liang Jin could make. It wasn't about possession or alpha instinct. It was about the fundamental truth of his being. Shun Yu's quiet was now the essential counterpoint to his noise. In the dead zone, their bond evolved. Without the Empire's rules, it became their sole survival tool. Shun Yu learned to interpret the bond signals for environmental dangers. A shift in the static might mean a radiation spike. A particular prickling sensation could indicate predatory fauna sensed by Liang Jin's still acute primal senses. Liang Jin, in turn, relied on Shun Yu to interpret the human world he'd always viewed through a distorted, overwhelming lens. That traitor's sense spiked with deception when he mentioned the route. Liang Jin would murmur after a rare encounter with other outcasts. He's afraid, not deceptive, Shun Yu would softly correct, sensing the emotional nuance Liang Jin's raw data couldn't parse. He's hiding from the Empire, too. They became one complete organism, the senses and the soul. And in the quiet moments, foraging for edible fungi or watching the toxic sunsets, something else grew. A tenderness, a belonging. Shun Yu's laughter, when it came, was a sound Liang Jin guarded more fiercely than any secret. Liang Jin's rare, unguarded smile was a sunrise Shun Yu lived for. One evening, Shun Yu found a patch of resilient, star-like blue flowers growing through a crack in the irradiated soil. He picked one and, wordlessly, tucked it into the strap of Liang Jin's field pack. Liang Jin touched the petals later, his senses drinking in the fragile, living scent amidst the death, a sensory gift only his guide would think to give. Their exile was not a punishment. It was the birth of their own nation, a nation of two. Chapter 5. The Hunters and the Hearth. The Empire did not forget. A weapon like Liang Jin could not be allowed to exist outside its control. A guide who could stabilize an S-class in the dead zone was a strategic miracle they now desperately wanted to reverse engineer. The Hunters came 6 months later. Not regular military, but stalkers, betas and low-class sentinels specifically trained and drugged to withstand the zone's chaos. They moved in a silent, 5-man unit, tech replaced by primal skill. Liang Jin sensed them first. A wrongness in the pattern of the wind, a chemical scent that didn't belong. The bond flashed with a silent, urgent warning. They were at their current shelter, a relatively stable cave system. Stalkers. 2 clicks out. Converging. Liang Jin breathed, already moving, packing essentials with lethal speed. We run, Shun Yu asked, his own fear a cold thread in the bond. They'll track. We ambush. Liang Jin's eyes were hard. He was no longer just protecting himself. He was protecting their peace. Their home. You are my advantage. Quiet the world for me. Just for them. Shun Yu understood. He would not be a liability. He would be the battlefield. They took position in a narrow canyon littered with metallic debris. Shun Yu focused, not on Liang Jin, but on the space between Liang Jin and the approaching hunters. He pushed his quiet field outward, not as a shield, but as a blanket of deadened sensation. He couldn't stop a bullet, but he could muffle the sound of a heartbeat, dull the scent of sweat, blur the thermal outline of a man against rock. The stalkers entered the canyon. To them, the world just went muffled. Their enhanced senses, their primary tool, became unreliable. Liang Jin struck from the silence Shun Yu crafted. He was a ghost. He used the confused sensory feedback Shun Yu created. A sound appearing to come from the left when he struck from the right, a scent trail leading into a dead end. He disarmed, disabled, and moved on. He was not the rampage here. He was a surgeon, and Shun Yu's field was his anesthetic. The final stalker, realizing his squad was falling to an unseen foe, panicked. He fired a sonic grenade, a weapon designed to overload Sentinel senses. The blast wave hit. Even muted by Shun Yu's field, it was a sledgehammer of pure noise to Liang Jin. He staggered, a cry of agony ripped from him as his auditory sense shattered into blinding pain. Shun Yu felt it through the bond, a psychic rupture. Without thinking, he ran from cover, not to Liang Jin, but at the stalker. He had no weapon. He had only his will. He threw his entire being, his quiet, into a single focus point, the stalker's mind. He didn't attack. He imposed stillness, a profound, deafening internal quiet. The stalker froze, finger on the trigger, eyes wide with confusion. The world of sound and mission simply switched off. It was enough. Liang Jin, fighting through the pain, closed the distance and rendered the man unconscious. In the sudden quiet, Liang Jin slumped against the canyon wall, blood trickling from his ears. Shen Yu rushed to him, hands fluttering, his own field now a desperate, soothing balm. Your ears will heal. You, Liang Jin grasped his wrist, his grip firm. You stopped him, with your quiet, all warred with pain in his expression. Not a C-class. Never a C-class. They had been hunted, and they had won. But the message was clear. The Empire would send more. Better ones. That night, Liang Jin's hearing was still ringing, a painful echo. Shen Yu made him lie down, head in his lap. He gently placed his palms over Liang Jin's ears, not to block sound, but to pour his quiet directly into the injury, a silent lullaby against the internal scream. Liang Jin looked up at him, the starlight from the cave mouth reflecting in his eyes. They will keep coming. For me. For you. For what we are. I know, Shen Yu whispered, stroking his hair. We cannot just hide forever. Liang Jin's voice was resolute. We must make them understand. We must make a stand where they cannot ignore us. The exile was over. The rebellion was entering a new phase. They were no longer just running. They were preparing to defend their right to exist. Chapter 6. The Echo Revealed. They left the heart of the dead zone, moving to its ragged edge where forgotten communities of exiles and gene-scrambled outcasts eked out a living. Here, word of the ghost Sentinel and his quiet guide had already spread in hushed, reverent tones. An old woman, a former Empire geneticist exiled for heresy, found them. Her name was Alara, and her eyes, magnified behind thick glasses, saw not people, but fascinating patterns. You, she said to Shen Yu, peering at him. Your empathic signature, it's not a field, it's a resonance. You don't suppress his senses. You harmonize with them. You create a conjugate quiet. She called them an echo guide, a theoretical class mentioned in pre-fall archives. Where a normal guide forces calm, an echo guide matches the Sentinel's unique sensory frequency and provides a counterwave, canceling out the chaos. It required a bond of profound synchronicity, a psychic symmetry. It wasn't about strength, it was about perfect pitch. And you, she turned to Liang Jin, your senses aren't just heightened, they're unfiltered. Most Sentinels have latent mental buffers. You have none. You perceive the raw data stream of reality. It's why other guides break against you. They try to shut down a fire hose with a cork. She pointed at Shen Yu, builds a channel for it to flow. They were two halves of a single, rare phenomenon, a lock and a key that fit no other. Alara had a proposal. She had a hidden lab, scavenged from the old world. The Empire wants to study you to make weapons. Let's study you to make a point. Let me map your bond. Show the data, the immutable proof that what you have is not a flaw, but a rare, natural evolution. That forcing you apart is not just cruel, but a scientific crime. It was a risk, to stay in one place, to be studied. But Shen Yu saw the fire in Liang Jin's eyes, the desire not just to hide, but to justify their choice, to have their bond recognized as real, not an error. They agreed. The weeks in Alara's lab were intimate and exposing. Sensors mapped their brainwaves, their empathic pulses. The data was undeniable. When Shen Yu's resonance peaked, Liang Jin's neural chaos flatlined into perfect, hyper-focused clarity. They were looking at the empirical signature of peace. During a deep synaptic scan, Shen Yu and Liang Jin were placed in linked meditation. In that shared, amplified space, they didn't just feel the bond, they saw it. Shen Yu saw Liang Jin's mindscape not as a storm, but as a vast, beautiful, and terrifying galaxy of interconnected sensations, each star a sound, each nebula a scent, each planet a texture. Overwhelming, yes, but magnificent. Liang Jin saw Shun Yu's not as a void, but as a deep, placid ocean whose currents held the emotional shape of the world. The warmth of joy, the cold press of fear, the shimmering patterns of thought. Profoundly quiet, but infinitely deep. Their bond was the gravity that held the galaxy and anchored the ocean. It was balance. After one such session, emotionally raw and profoundly connected, they sat together on the roof of the lab, watching the distorted auroras of the dead zone. Liang Jin had Xinyu pulled back against his chest, his chin resting on his guide's head. "Before you," Liang Jin murmured, his voice a vibration against Xunyu's back. "I was a weapon. I knew my function. My purpose was noise." His arms tightened slightly. "You gave me silence. You gave me a choice. Now my purpose is this. Guarding this quiet. Guarding you." Xinyu turned in his arms, facing him. He cupped Liang Jin's scarred cheek. "And before you, I was a shadow. I knew my place was to be overlooked. My purpose was to be silent." He leaned forward until their foreheads touched, the most intimate of their gestures. "You heard my silence. You chose it. Now, my purpose is to be the silence for your storm." It was their vow, not spoken over an altar, but on a poisoned rooftop at the edge of the world. Alara finished her work. She had compiled a manifesto, scientific, impassioned. The Bond of Symbiosis, a plea for biological autonomy. It contained their data, their story. She had contacts, a shaking network that could get it to sympathetic ears within the Empire, even to the public nets. "When you release this, they will come for you with everything they have," Xinyu said. Alara nodded. "Then you must be ready. And you must be somewhere symbolic." Liang Jin knew the place. The derelict Sentinel Training Academy at the edge of the dead zone. The place where he had been forged into a weapon. He would return there, not as a weapon, but as a man, to be decommissioned on his own terms. Chapter 7. The Siege of Silence. The manifesto spread like a virus. Within the Empire, it caused an uproar. Some called it heresy. Some, especially low-class guides and unstable sentinels, saw it as hope. The military saw it as the ultimate insubordination. They came for the academy with overwhelming force. Not just stalkers, but a full sentinel battalion with A-class guides, backed by heavy suppressors designed to nullify all empathic fields. Liang Jin and Xunyu stood in the ruined central courtyard. They had not come to fight an army. They had come to make a demonstration. As the Imperial forces surrounded them, Guide General Wen's voice boomed from a loudspeaker. "Sentinel Liang, Guide Shun, surrender for recalibration. This is your last chance to serve the Empire with honor." Liang Jin ignored him. He looked at Xunyu. "Are you ready?" Xunyu took a deep breath, reaching for the bond, not as a tether, but as a wellspring. Always. The suppressors powered up with a deafening whine. A crushing wave of null energy slammed into them, designed to shred any psychic connection. For a normal bond, it would have worked. It would have been agony. But their bond was not a bridge. It was a resonance. The suppressor wave hit Shun Yu's echo field and changed. Instead of breaking the bond, it was absorbed, transformed, and amplified through their unique harmonic. Shun Yu didn't fight the suppression. He tuned it. What radiated out from them then was not a null field, but a profound, breathtaking stillness. It washed over the advancing sentinels first. The A-class guides with them gasped, their own forceful fields sputtering and dying against this different, deeper quiet. The sentinels themselves stumbled. The chaotic sensory input they were constantly managing didn't get suppressed. It just settled. For the first time, many heard true silence. They felt a calm that wasn't forced upon them, but offered. Weapons lowered. Confusion rippled through the ranks. The betas and officers felt it too, a wave of pure, unadulterated peace that sapped aggression and clarity of purpose. It was a mind control. It was an invitation to cease. When screamed orders, his voice shrill over the comms. "Open fire. Take them down." A few soldiers tried, but aiming required focus, and focus was drifting away on a tide of quiet. Shots went wild. Liang Jin moved then, not to attack but to demonstrate. With Shun Yu at his side, a lighthouse of stillness, Liang Jin's senses were no longer a storm, but a perfectly tuned instrument. He could hear the individual malfunctioning capacitor in a distant tank. He could see the precise stress fracture in a sniper's perch. He could smell the ozone of a failing energy cell in a drone. He called out the flaws, his voice carrying in the strange quiet. Unit 7, your transport's coolant line is leaking. It will seize in 4.3 minutes. Sniper on the North Tower, your railing is compromised. Drone Cluster Beta, Cell 12, is critical. He wasn't threatening. He was informing, showing them the utter, useless precision of a weapon that no longer wished to be won, guided by a peace that would not be conquered. The siege stalled, not in a clash of arms, but in a bewildering, profound ceasefire. At the height of the stillness, Shun Yu did one more thing. He pushed the resonant field, carrying not just quiet, but the essence of their bond, the trust, the choice, the defiance, the tender moments under toxic stars. He sent it not as words, but as pure, empathic truth. Across the field, a young, low-class Sentinel, perpetually on the edge of psychosis, dropped to his knees and wept in relief. An A-class guide stared at her hands, feeling the brutalizing force of her own power for the first time. They were not defeating the Empire with weapons. They were showing it a mirror, and in that mirror, its doctrine of control looked hollow. Chapter 8. The New Frequency. The standoff lasted a day and a night. The Empire's forces did not withdraw, but they could not advance. To attack was to shatter the very peace they claimed sentinels and guides existed to create. A message came from the highest level. The Imperial Council demanded parley. Liang Jin and Shun Yu stood together in the ruined courtyard as the envoy approached. Not one, but an older, weary-looking Sentinel general and a senior counselor. "You have proven your point," the counselor said, her voice stripped of its usual authority. "What is it you want?" Liang Jin spoke, his hand finding Shun Yu's. "Recognition. The bond between a Sentinel and guide is sovereign. It is not subject to military assignment or genetic hierarchy. The right to choose. The right to refuse. The right to exist as we are." The general, a man who had lived by the old rules, looked at Liang Jin, then at their joined hands, then at the confused, placid faces of his own men. He saw the future of his military doctrine crumbling. He also saw, perhaps for the first time, a Sentinel who was not a pained, volatile weapon, but a calm, resolved man. "And if we grant this," the general asked, "you would return?" "No," Shun Yu answered softly. "We would coexist. We will live where we choose. But we offer this, a place, a sanctuary here at the edge, for sentinels and guides who break under your system, for those who seek a different bond. We will not be your weapons, but we can be your conscience." It was not surrender. It was a new treaty. The Empire, reeling and facing internal dissent inflamed by the manifesto, agreed. Not out of benevolence, but out of necessity. The Academy at the Edge was ceded to them, a sovereign territory of two. They did not go back. They built forward. The ruined Academy became a haven. Word spread. Broken sentinels began to arrive, twitching and haunted. Failed guides came, ashamed and empty. Shun Yu and Liang Jin did not fix them. They showed them. They demonstrated the resonance. Not all could achieve it. It was rare. But for the first time, they offered a model that wasn't about dominance and suppression, but about partnership and harmony. Years later, on the anniversary of their flight, they stood on the same rooftop where they had made their vow. The Academy below was no longer silent, but humming with life. The sounds of construction, of conversation, of children laughing. Children born of bonds chosen, not assigned. Liang Jin, his hair now threaded with silver at the temples, stood behind Shun Yu, arms wrapped around him as they watched the sunset paint the dead zone in hues of violet and gold. "Do you ever miss the quiet?" Liang Jin murmured into his hair. "The just us quiet." Shun Yu leaned back into his solid warmth, the bond between them a deep, constant song. "This is our quiet now," he said, smiling. "It's just a bigger